The funeral of Lionel Curry drew 112 mourners to the Whitfield Memorial Chapel on a Tuesday morning that threatened rain but never delivered. Among them sat a man nobody recognized, positioned in the last pew with his hands folded and his eyes fixed on the mahogany casket at the front of the room. He had been waiting 31 years for this moment. Amelia Powell noticed him first, and something about his presence made her forget how to breathe. She stood beside her husband's casket in a black Chanel dress that cost more than most people earned in a month, accepting condolences with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent 32 years performing the role of devoted wife. Her eyes were dry behind the delicate veil, not because she lacked grief, but because she had exhausted her tears years ago for reasons the mourners would never understand. The stranger in the back pew unsettled her in ways she couldn't immediately articulate. He was perhaps 40 years old, with salt and pepper hair and features that seemed hauntingly familiar, despite her certainty that they had never met. He wore a simple black suit, nothing designer, nothing that suggested wealth or status, yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. But it was his eyes that made her blood run cold. She had seen those eyes every day for 32 years. They were her dead husband's eyes, staring at her from a stranger's face. When their gazes met across the crowded chapel, Amelia felt something cold settle in her stomach. The stranger didn't look away, didn't blink, didn't offer the polite acknowledgement that social convention demanded. He simply watched her with an expression that seemed to say, "I know what you did." She looked away quickly, returning her attention to the elderly woman currently clasping her hands and murmuring sympathies about what a wonderful man Lionel had been. The words washed over Amelia like water over stone, meaningless sounds that bore no relationship to the complicated truth of her marriage. Lionel Curry had been many things. Wonderful was not among them. But the stranger kept watching, and Amelia kept feeling his gaze like a knife pressed against her throat. She had a terrible feeling that before this day ended, blood would be drawn. Caden Peterson watched his mother receive condolences with growing irritation, but his attention kept drifting to something far more troubling. The man in the last pew hadn't moved in 47 minutes. As the eldest son and heir apparent to the Curry family fortune, Caden had developed instincts for threat assessment that rivaled any security professional. He had spent 20 years learning his father's business, which meant 20 years learning to identify enemies before they struck. This stranger radiated danger like heat from an open flame. Caden's grief was complicated by relief, and relief was not an emotion that photographed well for the society pages. His father had been a tyrant in private, whatever face he showed the world. The beatings had stopped when Caden grew tall enough to fight back, but the psychological warfare had continued until the old man's heart finally gave out 3 days ago. Caden had received the news while dining at an exclusive restaurant with a woman who was not his wife, and his first emotion had been something dangerously close to joy. Now he stood with his siblings, performing sorrow he did not feel, counting the hours until the reading of the will. But that stranger wouldn't stop staring. Caden leaned toward his sister Meadow and whispered, "Do you know that man in the back? Last pew, right side." Meadow glanced over her shoulder, her movement subtle enough to escape notice from the other mourners. When she turned back, her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Her reaction told Caden everything and nothing simultaneously. "No," she said, but her voice carried a tremor that transformed the single word into an obvious lie. Caden filed that reaction away for later examination. His sister was hiding something massive, and the stranger in the back pew was connected to whatever secret she was protecting. Before the day ended, Caden intended to discover exactly what that secret was. He had no idea that the discovery would destroy everything he believed about his family. Comment below where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches. And if you believe every family secret deserves to be told, hit subscribe now. The service proceeded with the usual rituals of death among the wealthy, but Theodore Santana couldn't focus on a single word. The envelope in his briefcase felt like a bomb with a timer he couldn't see. Theodore had been the Curry family attorney for 18 years, long enough to know where most of the bodies were buried, both figuratively and literally. He sat in the second row, his leather briefcase positioned on his lap with casual precision that concealed its explosive contents. Lionel had summoned him 3 weeks before his death, clear-eyed and calm, despite the heart condition his doctors had been warning him about for years. The old man had handed Theodore an envelope sealed with wax, an affectation that seemed theatrical until Theodore understood its purpose. The seal ensured that Theodore couldn't read the contents without breaking it. The seal ensured that whatever secrets the envelope contained would remain hidden until the precise moment of revelation. "This is to be read at my funeral," Lionel had instructed. "After the service, before anyone leaves, you will read every word aloud, regardless of how the family reacts, regardless of what they threaten, regardless of what they offer you to stop." Theodore had agreed, because refusing Lionel Curry was not something people did without severe consequences. The old man had destroyed careers, bankrupted companies, and allegedly arranged accidents for those who crossed him. But now, sitting in the chapel with the envelope burning against his chest like radioactive material, Theodore wondered what chaos he was about to unleash upon a family that had no idea their foundation was built on quicksand. He noticed the stranger in the back pew and felt a chill of recognition that made no logical sense. The man's face was unfamiliar, yet something about his bone structure, the set of his jaw, the particular shade of his eyes triggered associations that Theodore couldn't quite complete. It was like seeing a photograph of someone you knew, but taken decades before you met them. Then Theodore looked at Caden Peterson, studying the eldest son's profile against the stained glass windows. The connection became terrifyingly clear. The stranger and Caden shared the same jawline, the same forehead, the same way of holding their shoulders when they were trying to appear relaxed while remaining vigilant. Theodore's hands began to tremble. He suddenly understood exactly what the envelope contained, and he wanted to run from the chapel and never stop running. But Lionel's instructions had been specific, and Theodore was far more afraid of a dead man's revenge than a living family's rage. The minister delivered his final blessing, and Theodore rose from his seat on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. It was time. Bennett Paul had waited 31 years for this moment, and now that it had arrived, he wasn't sure he could go through with it. He sat motionless in the last pew, watching the family that should have been his accept condolences from strangers who knew nothing about the truth. The widow in her expensive dress, the eldest son with his barely concealed contempt, the daughter who had glanced at him with recognition that suggested she knew more than she was supposed to know. His mother had told him the truth before she died, 6 months ago in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and approaching death. Colette Swanson had spent 31 years keeping a promise she should never have made. "Your father's name was Lionel Curry," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. "He paid me to disappear when I was pregnant with you. He gave me enough money to start over and made me swear never to contact him or reveal the truth to anyone." Bennett had listened in stunned silence as his mother unraveled the mystery of his absent father, a mystery he had stopped asking about by the time he was 8 years old. "He was afraid," Colette continued, "afraid of his family's judgment, afraid of losing his inheritance, afraid of the scandal. He was young and ambitious, and utterly convinced that money was more important than love." "Why are you telling me now?" Bennett had asked. His mother's eyes had filled with tears that she no longer had the strength to shed. "Because I'm dying, and I won't leave you with unanswered questions, and because—" She paused, gathering strength for words that seemed to cost her everything. "Because I need you to promise me something. Anything. When Lionel dies, I want you to attend his funeral. I want you to stand in the same room as the man who abandoned us and find a way to forgive him. Not for his sake, but for yours." Bennett had made the promise, never imagining that Lionel Curry would outlive his mother by only 6 months. Now he sat in the chapel, watching the family mourn a man who had thrown him away like garbage, and wondered if forgiveness was even possible for wounds this deep. Then the attorney rose from his seat, and Bennett understood that the day's revelations had only begun. "If I may have everyone's attention," Theodore announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. "Before we proceed to the burial, there is a matter that must be addressed. Lionel left specific instructions that a letter be read aloud at the conclusion of his funeral service." Emilia's head snapped toward him with the speed of a striking snake. "Theodore, this is hardly the appropriate moment for legal matters. I'm afraid Lionel was quite specific. The letter must be read before anyone leaves the chapel." Theodore held up the sealed envelope, and Bennett noticed that the attorney's hands were shaking badly. "I have not seen its contents. I am merely following my client's final wishes." Caden stepped forward, his expression shifting from grief performance to genuine threat. "Whatever games my father was playing, they died with him. We can address his instructions at the formal reading of the will." "This is separate from the will." Theodore's voice cracked slightly but held. "And I am legally obligated to fulfill my client's instructions regardless of family objections." A murmur rippled through the assembled mourners like wind through dry grass. This was exactly the kind of drama that made funeral attendance worthwhile for those with no genuine connection to the deceased. Bennett saw smartphones appearing in hands throughout the chapel, ready to document whatever scandal was about to unfold. He should leave. He should walk out the door and disappear back into the anonymous life he had built for himself, far from the Curry family's wealth and dysfunction. Instead, he rose from his seat. "Perhaps I should leave before you read that letter," Bennett said, his voice carrying easily across the silent chapel. "I didn't come here to cause disruption." Every eye in the room turned toward him. Emilia's face went white as bone. Caden's hands clenched into fists that promised violence. Meadow looked away entirely, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. But it was the youngest son, Kenzo Bentley, who spoke first. "Who the hell are you?" The young man's voice cracked with a mixture of grief and confusion. "Why do you look like my father?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a daiguspé explosion. Bennett realized that his resemblance to Lionel Curry was far more obvious than he had imagined. 3 decades had weathered his features into a near-perfect echo of the photographs he had seen of his father as a younger man. "Read the letter," Bennett said to Theodore, ignoring the question that would soon answer itself. Let him tell the truth in his own words. He remained standing as Theodore broke the wax seal with trembling fingers, and 112 mourners held their breath. Theodore unfolded the heavy paper and began to read aloud, his voice steadier than his hands. "To my family and those assembled to mourn my passing, I have lived a life built on lies, and I do not intend to carry those lies into whatever comes after death. What follows is the truth, the complete truth, and I ask only that you hear it completely before passing judgment on a dead man who can no longer defend himself." Theodore paused, glancing at the family's frozen faces before continuing. 31 years ago, before I married Amelia, I was involved in a relationship with a woman named Colette Swanson. We were young and reckless and deeply in love, though I was too ambitious and too cowardly to recognize what I was throwing away. When Colette became pregnant, I panicked. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the chapel. Theodore pressed on, his voice growing stronger, as if the words themselves were lending him courage. I paid Colette to disappear. I told her that my family would never accept a child born out of wedlock, that my inheritance would be forfeit, that both she and the child would be better off without me. I gave her enough money to start a new life far from everyone who knew my name, and I extracted a promise that she would never contact me or reveal the truth to anyone. Theodore's voice caught on the next words, but he forced himself to continue. The child was a boy. She named him Bennett Paul. He was my firstborn son. He is in this chapel as I speak these words. The room erupted. Caden lunged toward Bennett, but two other mourners grabbed his arms before he could cross the distance. Emilia sank into the nearest pew, her face the color of ash. Kenzo stared at Bennett with an expression of dawning horror that suggested he was doing rapid calculations about inheritance percentages. Only Meadow remained still, tears streaming silently down her face. A son spent 31 years abandoned because a man chose money over family. A child grew up asking why his father didn't want him, while that same father watched from the shadows doing nothing. If you feel that pain in your chest right now, subscribe, comment. Truth matters. If you believe no child should ever be thrown away for an inheritance, don't let the cowards win. Quiet, Theodore shouted, his professional composure finally asserting itself. There is more. Lionel was specific that every word must be read. The chaos subsided into tense silence. 112 people frozen in various poses of shock and outrage. Theodore continued reading. Bennett grew up in modest circumstances, never knowing his father's identity. His mother kept her promise until the day she died, 6 months ago, carrying our secret to her grave. I watched him from a distance over the years, hiring investigators to track his progress, collecting photographs and report cards and news clippings about his accomplishments. I told myself this was enough. I told myself he was better off without the burden of the Curry name and the curse of the Curry fortune. Bennett felt tears sliding down his own face, but he made no move to wipe them away. His father had watched him. For 31 years his father had watched from the shadows, knowing everything, doing nothing. I was a coward, Theodore read on. I chose wealth and status and family expectations over my own child. I married Emilia and raised Caden and Meadow and Kenzo, giving them every advantage that I had denied Bennett. I built an empire while my firstborn struggled through life without a father's guidance or support. I accumulated wealth that would have made his life easier, and I hoarded it like a dragon guarding stolen gold. Emilia raised her head, her expression transforming from shock into something far more dangerous. You knew, she whispered, though whether she was addressing the letter or some memory of her husband, no one could tell. All those years, all those times I asked about your past, and you lied to my face. Theodore's voice grew stronger as he approached the letter's most devastating revelation. I am making what amends I can, though I know they are insufficient. Bennett Paul is my son and rightful heir. My will has been amended to reflect this truth. He will receive an equal share of my estate alongside Caden, Meadow, and Kenzo. Additionally, I am leaving him the controlling interest in Curry Industries, as he is the eldest and has demonstrated, through his life, that he possesses the integrity I always lacked. Caden finally broke free from the men restraining him. This is fraud. His voice echoed off the chapel walls like thunder. He manipulated my father on his deathbed. I'll have this overturned before the ink dries on the probate documents." "There's more," Theodore said, stepping backward as Caden advanced. "Please, let me finish what your father wanted the world to hear." Caden stopped, his chest heaving with rage barely contained. Theodore read the final paragraphs, and the words fell like stones into still water. "To Bennett, my firstborn son, I am sorry for the lifetime of absence that no words can repair. I watched you become a good man, despite every obstacle I placed in your path. You built a life through honest work and genuine connection, things I never valued until it was too late to change who I had become. I do not expect your forgiveness. I only hope that you will accept what I am offering and build something better than I ever could. To my other children. What I have done to Bennett was a crime against family and decency. The fact that you were raised with advantages he was denied does not make you more worthy of inheritance. It makes you beneficiaries of an injustice I am now attempting to correct, however imperfectly. To Emilia, you deserved better than the man I was. Perhaps you knew that all along. Perhaps that knowledge is why our marriage became the cold arrangement it was for so many years. I failed you as surely as I failed Bennett, and I am sorry." Theodore lowered the letter. It's signed and dated 3 weeks before his death, witnessed by myself and notarized according to all legal requirements. The will amendment has been filed with the appropriate courts. It is, as far as I can determine, completely uncontestable. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Bennett had ever heard. Then Myra Nunes stepped forward, and everyone turned to stare at the woman they had all forgotten was present. Myra had been the Curry family housekeeper for 27 years, invisible in the way that household staff learned to be invisible at family functions. She moved through their lives like a ghost, seeing everything, saying nothing, until now. I can confirm the truth of what that letter says. The family turned toward her with expressions of bewilderment mixed with outrage. Myra had served them dinner, cleaned their rooms, washed their clothes. The idea that she possessed information about family secrets seemed as absurd as learning that the furniture had opinions. I found Mr. Curry's investigation files years ago, Myra continued, her voice steady despite the attention of over 100 people. He kept them in a hidden safe behind the painting in his study. Photographs of Bennett at every age, report cards, newspaper clippings about his accomplishments, letters Mr. Curry wrote but never sent. She reached into her purse and withdrew a stack of envelopes tied with faded ribbon. He gave me these the week before he died, asked me to hold on to them until after the funeral. She crossed the chapel and offered the bundle to Bennett. He wanted you to know that he thought about you every single day, that he loved you, even though he was too weak to show it. Bennett accepted the letters with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His father had written to him. For 31 years, his father had written letters he never sent, pouring out thoughts and feelings that Bennett had desperately needed to hear. The cruelty of it was almost worse than the abandonment. Meadow moved to stand beside Bennett, her movement drawing every eye. "I knew," she said quietly. "I found out 6 months ago." Caden spun toward his sister, his face contorted with betrayal. "What are you talking about?" "I was going through Father's study, looking for documents related to my divorce settlement. I found the investigation files, the same ones Myra mentioned. Decades of photographs, reports, everything he had collected about Bennett." Her voice cracked. "I confronted him about it. He made me promise to keep silent until after his death." "You knew our father had a secret son, and you said nothing?" Caden's voice rose to a shout that made several mourners flinch. "You let this stranger walk into our lives without warning us?" "He's our brother, Caden." Meadow's tears fell freely now. "Whatever father did, Whatever lies were told, Bennett is our family. I've been watching him from across the chapel all morning, seeing Father's face in his features, knowing that everything I believed about our family was built on secrets and silence and shame. She turned to face Bennett directly, reaching out to touch his arm with tentative gentleness. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what was done to you. I'm sorry for the years you lost. I'm sorry that I was raised in privilege while you struggled without knowing why you had been abandoned by a man who was watching you the entire time. Bennett shook his head slowly, overwhelmed by the collision of emotions he couldn't process. I didn't come here looking for apologies. I didn't even know about the will until Theodore contacted me last week. He looked around the chapel at the stunned faces of strangers and newly discovered family alike. My mother told me the truth before she died. She gave me my father's name and explained why she had kept silent all those years. She made me promise not to seek him out while he was alive, not to disrupt the life he had built on my absence. I kept that promise. I'm only here because she asked me to find a way to forgive him. Have you? Kenzo asked, his young voice cutting through the tension. Forgiven him, I mean. Bennett looked at the casket containing his father's body, the man he had never known except through photographs and investigator reports, and now these unread letters. I thought I had, but standing here, learning that he watched me struggle while he lived in luxury, learning that he wrote letters he never sent while I wondered every day why my father didn't want me. His voice broke. I don't know if I can forgive that. I don't know if anyone could. Emilia rose from the pew where she had been sitting in stunned silence. Her face had transformed during the revelations, cycling through shock and grief and rage until settling on something that looked almost like relief. 32 years, she said, her voice carrying across the chapel with the authority of a woman who had finally stopped pretending. 32 years I was married to a man I never really knew. 32 years of feeling like something was wrong, like there was a part of him I couldn't reach, like our marriage was missing something essential. She walked toward Bennett slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Now I understand. The part of him I couldn't reach was guilt. He was drowning in it every single day. And instead of telling me the truth, he let it poison everything. She stopped in front of Bennett, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. You have his eyes, she said softly. I noticed the moment I saw you sitting in the back. I thought I was losing my mind, seeing my dead husband's eyes in a stranger's face. I'm sorry, Bennett said. I didn't mean to cause you pain. Emilia laughed, a sharp sound that held no humor. You didn't cause my pain. Lionel did, 31 years ago, when he chose money over his child. Everything that came after was just consequence. She reached out and touched his face, a gesture so unexpected that Bennett froze. Welcome to the family, Emilia said. God help you, because we're all broken in ways you can't imagine. Theodore cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. There's one more thing. The family turned toward him with expressions of exhausted dread. The letter had already destroyed their understanding of their father, their family, their entire history. What more could possibly remain? Theodore pulled a second envelope from his briefcase, and Bennett felt ice form in his stomach. This is addressed to Bennett specifically, to be delivered only after the first letter was read. Lionel was clear that it should be opened privately, but he left the choice to you. Bennett accepted the envelope with numb fingers. His name was written on the front in handwriting that matched the letter Theodore had just read. His father's handwriting. Words shaped by hands that had never touched him, never held him, never offered comfort during the long nights of his childhood. Read it now, Emilia urged. If Lionel wanted his secrets told, let's hear all of them. I'm finished living in the dark about the man I was married to. The other family members nodded their agreement, united for the first time since the service began. Bennett opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a brief handwritten note. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, and the chapel watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally shock so profound that he staggered backward. "What is it?" Caden demanded. "What did he write?" Bennett held up the photograph so everyone could see. It showed two young men standing together on what appeared to be a college campus, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the carefree joy of youth. One was unmistakably a young Lionel Curry. The other was Hugo Bates. Hugo Bates, the business rival who had died 5 years ago after decades of bitter, public competition with the Curry family. Hugo Bates, who had attended Bennett's mother's funeral and wept like his heart was breaking. Hugo Bates, who had been Bennett's unofficial mentor and surrogate father for the past 15 years. Bennett read the note aloud, his voice hollow. "Bennett, the man in this photograph was my closest friend before ambition and jealousy destroyed our relationship. We competed for Colette's love when we were young, and I won. But the victory was hollow because I threw away what I had won. What I never told anyone was that Hugo never stopped loving Colette. When I abandoned her, he found her. He helped her raise you. He was the father figure I refused to be. The rivalry that defined both our careers was never about money or power. It was about you, Bennett. It was about my guilt and his righteousness. It was about two men who loved the same woman and the same child, handling that love in opposite ways. Hugo was a better man than I ever was. I hope you told him that before he died." The photograph trembled in Bennett's hands as 31 years of hidden connections suddenly became visible. Uncle Hugo, he had called the man throughout his childhood. Hugo had taught him to ride a bike. Hugo had helped him with college applications. Hugo had given him his first job, his first business lessons, his first understanding of what a good man looked like. And Hugo had never once mentioned that he knew Bennett's real father, that he had loved Bennett's mother, that the famous Curry-Bates rivalry was actually a decades-long war over a woman and child that both men had lost in different ways. "They both loved her," Myra said softly into the stunned silence. "And they both loved you, in their different ways. Lionel from a distance, with guilt eating him alive. Hugo up close, with the devotion your father couldn't provide. Two men shaped by the same woman and the same child, their entire lives twisted around secrets they all agreed to keep." Caden sat down heavily in the nearest pew, his rage deflated by revelations too complex to process through simple anger. "So, everything," he said slowly, "the family business, the competition with Bates Industries, father's obsession with destroying Hugo in every deal, every contract, every market, all of it was about a woman and a baby from 30 years ago?" "All of it," Theodore confirmed. "I suspected something deeper drove their rivalry, but I never had proof until now." Kenzo laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "Our entire lives were a lie. Everything we believed about our family, our father, our legacy, all of it was built on one secret that nobody would tell." Bennett looked at the photograph one final time, at his father and Hugo Bates, young and happy, and unaware of how badly they would hurt each other in the decades to come. Then he looked at his newly discovered siblings, at the widow who had welcomed him despite having every reason to reject him, at the housekeeper who had held on to letters for 31 years, at the chapel full of mourners who had just witnessed the complete destruction of a family's mythology. "Now we bury a man who spent his whole life running from the truth," Bennett said. Then we decide if we're going to make the same mistakes or learn from his. He extended his hand toward Caden. I'm not here to take what's yours. I'm not here to claim a family I don't know. I'm just here because a woman who loved me asked me to find a way to forgive a man who didn't deserve it. Caden stared at the offered hand, seeing in Bennett's features the same stubborn determination that had made Lionel Curry both brilliant and unbearable. After a long moment, he reached out and accepted it. "Welcome to the family," Caden said grimly, "whatever that means now." The mourners began moving toward the exits, conversations buzzing with the scandal they had just witnessed. But the family remained frozen in the chapel, trying to comprehend the new reality they had been thrust into. Bennett stood among them, neither fully family nor fully stranger, occupying the space between worlds that his father's choices had created for him 31 years ago. In his pocket, the bundle of unsent letters waited to be read. In his hand, the photograph of two young men reminded him that nothing about his life had ever been what it seemed. But for the first time since his mother's death, he felt something that might have been hope. The truth was finally told. The lies were finally dead, and whatever came next would be built on honesty, even if honesty hurt more than any secret ever could. Lionel Curry thought he could take his secrets to the grave. He thought no one would ever know the truth about the son he abandoned and the friend he betrayed. He was wrong. And if you felt something watching this, if your heart raced or your eyes burned, hit subscribe and stay with us. Because stories like this need to be told, and people like you need to hear them.